All right, welcome back. Next we have Nathan Adams with Developers Are Not Designers. Go ahead, Nathan.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. A little bit about me. Most of my role these days is user experience. And I do a little bit of development, and I do a bit more development than I probably should these days. Sean can contest to just how good some of my code is. What I want to talk to you about is a very provocative question. It started from something I read 3 or 4 months ago, and it seemed to be suggesting developers make really bad designers. And I kind of thought, well, that's quite an interesting question. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but it got me thinking. And so I'm going to start with a little bit of story of me. I've just coming up to spending 20 years working with SAP, which I really don't like thinking about, but it is actually true. And when I was at school, I wanted to be an architect, and I got really interested in graphic design. So I'm not going to spend too long on this, but I wanted to build houses, I wanted to draw things, and that's what I was interested in. I somehow finished up doing environmental science at university. That's not relevant, but I did do a lot of coding as part of that. I also didn't want to be outside that much. Looks really nice in that picture. It's not when it's November and it's raining. So somehow I finished up at Barclays Bank. I finished up working on SAP, and the wonderful, wonderful world of what have we got here? We've got some SAP GUI, we've got some ABAP WebDimpro and some Java WebDimpro. All pretty horrid. And that was, I guess, 10, 13 years of my career was working with that and not thinking too much about how it impacted on people. Design was very much a thing about, can we get it to do what it needs to do? And then about the time UI5 came along, I started moving into other things, and this is much more of my life now. It's back to where I started. It's drawing. Some of it hand-drawn, some of it all sorts of stuff, and for those who know me, they might recognize a few things in there. I believe one of those applications has just gone live, actually, but I don't think it looks like the original mock-up because we got it wrong. So that's how I got to here, but what I'm finding interesting is I'm now going back much more to the things I learned at school. They are the things that are actually getting me through my day-to-day job in terms of doing what I need to do, not the development things. So we're going to have a nice grey slide now because there's nothing to look at and I'm going to talk. Yeah. For me, design has changed. In my career, as I started off, everything I learned as a developer, everything I learned as a business analyst, all helped me get to the world of design. I finished up designing applications on SAP, solution architecture, all of those kind of things, all using the skills I learned as a developer and as business analyst. What I started to realize, and what I started to realize as I looked back at the projects that have been successful and not successful, once I moved into the world of trying to design for a user experience, was actually I was missing a whole bunch of skills. And I think that's the crux of this gnarly little question at the beginning, which is, can developers make good designers? Now, actually, I think if you're going to be a technical designer, of course you can, absolutely. But I think what happens is we need to start thinking about learning additional skills, additional techniques. There's lots of stuff we've learned, but there's lots of stuff we don't know. And as I looked more and more at the projects that went well and the projects that didn't go well, I could see some strands coming out of that. And the biggest one that came out was as soon as I had both of the roles of developer and designer, it went wrong. So if I designed it and then went and did the development on it, that project was generally not as successful. Maybe that's because I'm not the best coder in the world, but that's another matter. But there's something going on in that. And this is what I want to talk to you about. And I want to talk to you about why this design is different. And already, for those who've been in this room this afternoon, there's a lovely reference earlier to Fiori, what it's about, and actually what some of the principles behind it are about. And that, for me, is this huge change in the world of SAP. Absolutely huge change. Now, it has been there in the past, but actually, it's really, really different now. We have to think about how we put applications together in a very, very different way. That means we have to do very, very different things as designers. So, apologies, by the way, I can't see my notes at the moment, so I'm having to do this from memory, so it's a good thing I tried to memorize it. So, yeah, the design process has changed. The things we need to do, so just things like getting requirements are totally different, and for me the techniques and things like design thinking are really, really important in terms of how we get really good requirements in the first place. 10 years ago, getting requirements was as simple as I need X to happen at the end and some stuff needs to happen beforehand and these people need to do it. Now, it's much more significant. It's trying to really understand what's going on. And actually one of the key principles in Fiori around simplicity really demands that we get right back to how important those requirements are. Because it's very easy to build what people expect them to. The classic example is, I think it's Henry Ford who said, if I ask people what they want in a car, they're just going to change what they have today. They're not going to look at the next generation. So it's really difficult to get out of people. People talk about what they know. So being able to go behind that, the example I keep using is, and I've come across this one in real life, was we want to enable approvals for mobile applications. Oh, excellent, great, we can do that. We've got the apps for it. We've got Fiori now that's responsive. We can look at how that works. But then you dig into it a little bit more and you discover that actually the reason why they want it to be mobile is because they've got so many approvals, and what they want to do is they want to do it on the train in the morning whilst they're coming into work. And actually you go into it even further and what you realise is their approval strategy is incorrect. That actually what they're doing is they're approving tons of things they shouldn't be doing. So actually you completely change the problem statement to say, can we get rid of some of those things that you want to approve? And can we take those away? And actually you can finish up in a position where you don't need to build a mobile app. What you need to do is change your workflow, and you need to look at what can be auto-approved. So that ability to get behind that, that's perhaps no different to anything we've done in the past. So that's a good one. We can build on that. We can continue to do that. But we've got to be prepared to go that step further. And again, when I look at it as projects that have worked and projects that have not worked as well, have been the ones where we've relied too much on our preconceptions and too much on our assumptions as to what things are going to look like. And what we haven't done is really solve the problem. All we've done is given a nice kind of shiny look and feel on an existing problem. That's not good. That doesn't give you a rewarding user experience. And then the other thing that's changed is people's expectations and the way we have to look at how we design it. So some of it is more technical. I know technical is the wrong word, sorry. More skill-based. I know I've had a few conversations with people. They said, well, I don't really like trying to draw user interfaces. I'm not very good at drawing. And there's a separate conversation about, well, actually it's something you can practice and it's something you can get better at. But actually that ability to communicate visually, to be able to develop ideas with people is really key. And again, that's something that's changed, and that might be something that is a little bit different for people. And what I see a lot at the moment is, and I think it's great that these tools are out there, is developers getting excited about things like Splash and Build. Really, really great tools, and I see so much potential in those for changing how we go about designing things. But actually, let's not forget that as a designer, the most important tool we have is something like a whiteboard and a marker or a piece of paper and a pencil. And when I start to design something, I am back to being 16 again. I've got a drawing board at home, I get pieces of paper out and a pencil, and I draw it by hand because it's so much easier to work with that. Can be a really effective way of working with people. So that's perhaps a new skill to learn. Perhaps you're doing it already. That's great. Then there's the interesting area, and this is the area where I feel, personally, I am right at the beginning of this journey. And that is all the different things we can be looking at to understand how users' experience is affected. So many different things, whether it's things like A/B testing, limited betas, actual research-based things, so observation. I mean, one of the things I'm really keen to do at some point, and sadly I've yet to have a project come along that will allow me to do this, is literally let's get a bunch of users in a room like this, and let's just let them have a play with it and observe them and see how they work, because we all bring preconceptions to the table as to how well our user interfaces work. And I think the Fiori apps are a really good example of how there is some absolutely amazing stuff in there, and the level of simplification is really, really good. But actually what I also see are a couple of things that don't work. And again, for anyone who was in the room earlier, the example of multiple approvals, which is really, really good. I like the way it's done. The button does not scream multiple approvals to me. Now, it may well do to lots of other people in this room. And that is one of those key things we have to start trying to understand how we measure and how we deal with it. So how do we go about understanding how people react to something that we think is obvious? And that is one of the hardest things, I think. And I think this is one of the things that actually makes it harder as a developer to be good at this process, because we become immune, if you like, to all of these conventions. And actually, if you're using HCP, you're using something that's already in a Fiori style. So this is becoming the everyday visual language that we are getting used to using. And in fact probably are used to using now. So we understand how things behave. So we're not seeing the things that don't make sense so much anymore. So we need to be really careful. We have to have that ability to be able to step outside and try and see things through fresh eyes, but we also have to understand the techniques we can go and use to do that. And to me, this is where the design space has changed. This is where I have to go and learn new things. And for me, that's good, because I'm always excited by learning new things, and it's an interesting place to go. Let's look at it from the developer side. I've mentioned a few things in there. I'm a developer. I quite enjoy it. In fact, one of my rules for this year is I'm trying to get less excited by dev things, and I watch some of my colleagues going off doing really interesting things, and I'm trying not to, because I want to spend time learning some of these other skills. So I get a lot of this, but I think there are some things. I think there's this idea I have in my head, which I kind of call the tyranny of controls, which is controls are excellent. Controls are what allow us to do the job we do and to do it quickly and effectively. But they're also our biggest weakness, because they are potentially a fixed palette of things that we can work with. And therefore they drive us down certain routes. And I'm going to pick on Eclipse, because I hate Eclipse. I'm fairly certain everything on that is a standard control. And for me, you know, the underlying rule is just because you can doesn't mean you should. That window just absolutely defines Eclipse for me, by the way. 1,000,001 things that I don't know what they're doing, and I can't find what I want to do. And that's my very personal opinion. Yes, exactly. So this just happened to be that I was looking for really bad UI examples, and this was the one that came up. I couldn't really resist it. But I think controls can be dangerous because I think what they do is they lull us into a sense of security and ease. And when someone comes to us, what it does is it means if we're not careful, we skip over the really key part of the process, which is what is it you want to do? What is the simplicity of it? And we dive straight into, I could have a calendar control there and I can give you a form there and a list there, job done. And we've not really applied. We might say we've designed that and we might lay something out, we might do some drawings. We've not put any thought in it. And this is one of the other things that actually worries me about some of the prototyping tools out there. Again, I am pretty much wholeheartedly in support of prototyping tools. I think they're awesome. But they have the danger of pushing us too fast down the process. One of the things we've been doing in Bluefin, and we've just sort of kicked off, and I met up with them for the first time last week, I think. As a design agency we use occasionally, we're trying to build some closer links with them so that we can look at the techniques they use and learn from them. They're coming more from the design side, so they're the guys with the crayons, we're the guys with code. And what we'd like to do is learn some of the stuff they do so we don't have to keep using them for everything. I don't think they, well, no, we want to use them, don't get me wrong. But there's stuff for smaller projects where it doesn't make sense to use them, and we would like to have those skills to enhance the offering we have. And we went out for dinner, and the topic that kept coming up in conversation all night was, how do we slow things down a little bit? And this isn't how do we do stuff more slowly, but it's more how do we avoid leaping into building stuff straight away. You know, it sometimes feels like a lot of developers don't think they're doing anything unless they're writing code. It's not an unreasonable point, I guess, but it is a danger that what we do is we don't take time to reflect. We don't put the design together properly. So for me, controls are really important. Really, really important. You know, if we haven't got them, we can't do the job we're doing. But we need to make sure we're not constrained by them. And we need to make sure that we don't get sucked into that getting ahead of ourselves. And I made the joke the other day, I think it's a 1.34 that's just come out, and we were looking at the new controls. And as I was looking through them, I thought, there's enough here to build SAP GUI. With the new, can't remember what it's called, TNT is it? So I've got my thing, I just thought, that is Enjoy SAP from however long ago it was. I wonder when someone's going to do that. Because actually, I think if you go back, I don't know this well enough, but I think if you go back and you look at the origins of SAP GUI, it was done with all the right principles in mind. I remember the new controls coming in 4 onwards, getting quite excited by them and using them and all the challenges that came with that. But they got overused. Too much on the screen, the focus was lost, and it's controls are this thing that just can totally mess you up, to my mind. So there's that danger there. So that's how the design has changed. So I'm going to go back to this point about being a developer and a designer at the same time. And the conclusion I came to as to why this doesn't work well is because it's literally a conflict of interest. It's representing 2 very different interests that are very important in a project. As a developer, we have a responsibility to build what's needed, to get the job done, and to do it as efficiently and cheaply as possible, which is absolutely right. And as a designer, we have some similar overlapping ones about we need to come up with a solution that does all of those things, but we need to be able to delight people, and we need to do these kind of things. And these are generally not cheap for a start, and they involve more thinking, and they, you know, we need to perhaps get behind stuff. And therefore, to a certain extent, as a developer, I'm representing whoever's building this, and as a designer, I'm more representing the actual end user and the customer. And that's where I believe this conflict of interest comes in. And I think unless you're able to sort of compartmentalize those two different things, it's very difficult to do a good job. So to go back to my original question, developers, can they be designers? Yes, they can. I believe they absolutely can. And I really hope that there are people in this room who are interested in learning all of those additional skills I talked about. I'm sure there are some people in here who've learned those additional skills as well, and I hope they teach the rest of us. But I think it is really difficult to do those two at the same time. Work on a project as a developer, that's great. Work on a project as a designer, but don't be a designer who takes it through to development. Because I've caught myself doing it. I've been sat looking at the design, and I've gone, that control, that'll do that job, it'll be really easy. I'm not going to suggest anything else because I don't want to make my own life difficult. And I used to work, I used to work with someone who was my lead developer on a project, and I actually knew if I was pitching things right, if his face looked incredibly pained, I was obviously suggesting something that was technically not feasible. If he looked happy, I perhaps wasn't pushing him hard enough. And that made me think, now, obviously sometimes the solution is straightforward, but that quite often made me think, maybe I haven't properly teased out what's going on here because he's looking like it's really simple, and actually I don't think it is a simple problem. And that partnership, it made me realise that actually that partnership is really powerful. That's where really good work comes from. Having a designer and a lead developer, or a designer and a team of developers, or a team of developers and team of designers, they're all interacting with one another and pushing one another. And if we think about how user interfaces have developed over the years, they're not really that different. I mean, still an input box. I can go back to my very early days at Barclays with mainframes and kicks screens, and it's an input box. It's not changed much. But think about all the things that very clever developers have thought about that have really improved that experience, whether it's Google and I'm typing something in and it's bringing me back likely searches that match that, and all that kind of look ahead type stuff. It takes really good developers to make that happen. But it takes really good designers to get it right as well. And there's I don't know if this is just in SAP GUI for Java, but I've noticed in the version I'm currently running, there's a really clever look ahead when I start typing things in things like SE38, SE24. Doesn't work. It's really good. It gives me results back. It has a really nasty problem of ignoring what I've just typed in. There's a weird thing going on where when it suggests stuff, if I get it at the wrong point, it deletes what I just put in and gives me one of the suggestions off the list. And it's annoying. And it's a transaction if I'm developing, because I do back-end stuff as well, quite a lot of the time. And it's really, really frustrating. And that, to my mind, is the other side of the coin. It's where the designer can say, well, what I wanted it to do was this, and it's not. And developers sometimes can get caught in the, and I've done it, well, it's working, does what you said it was going to do. So getting that dynamic is really important, and being able to use the designer as a QA point at the end to say, does this actually achieve the vision and goal we had at the beginning? So I'm just going to close up talking about what that means for me and hopefully what that means for you. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things that means for me is I've got a whole bunch of things to go and learn. We've started up talking to this design agency. We're going to see what we can do to learn a lot, and also within the organisation to teach everyone else. And as part, that's actually come out of, we have launched a community within Bluefin that's looking at design thinking and user experience. We see those much as very two sides of the coin. User experience, good user experience is what we want. Design thinking is going to be one of the tools we use to get there. So we're trying to do this internally and move in this direction. So this is one of my big focuses for this year, is getting all of this moving, getting us to a really good place. I think one of the really interesting things, and I think there are quite a few people involved in this, but I think this is very much Sean's baby, is first of all, the Open UI5 community, but secondly, the custom control side of it. This for me is a really interesting dynamic that we can get set up. Sean's been working on an address search, which is a pet topic of mine because I wrote a one-line address search for the back end, so I'd love to get that joined up at some point. But for me, this is something different that I don't think has existed in the world of SAP before, and I think is really, really important. Is I said earlier that we have this tyranny of controls. Well, one of the ways round that is being able to say where the controls don't quite work for the intended use case and to find better ways of using them. And custom controls, to my mind, are one of those things that allow us to get ideas out there that say, this is a different way of doing this. This could be a really good control that works in this circumstance, or modifying what's there to make it work in a different way. Because actually this ability, and if I go back to the SAP GUI days again, you couldn't really do much as far as I recall in terms of creating your own controls. UI5 gives us that ability to do that, and that for me is the really exciting part of this going forward. And we've had an internal conversation, and there's an internal project going on, and it's a really good example of what happens when you have projects led by developers, because it's been quite full on and quite exciting. But we've been looking at the new planning calendar control and whether it's suited for, we're looking at displaying our resourcing information, and it's, to my mind, it's not quite there yet. It doesn't do what we need it to, and that's perfectly fine because I think we're trying to use it for something it's not quite designed for. And that's where I come back to this idea of custom controls, and I hope this is one area where actually these custom controls inspire the next releases of UI5 as it goes along. Whether it will or not is another matter, but I really hope that's what happens. That is basically all I have to say. So questions, and actually before questions, my contact details are on here. I would love to hear your experiences and your thoughts. This is, I think, a really important area. I think this is actually really new for SAP. I think it's a new skill. I wonder if it's going to be a generational thing where actually the people who come behind us will have learnt this at our feet, as it is. And this won't be such an issue, but they'll probably have some other challenge. So over to you guys. Yeah.
What's your opinion about semantic widgets?
Sorry, say again?
What's your opinion about semantic widgets?
Ooh. Do you want to just, I think I know what you mean by semantic widget, but I just want to check I haven't got the wrong end of the stick.
Just you define that you've got a panel and you define that there exists an accept button, there exists a print button, a client button, and so on, and the widget positions it somewhere. So you don't specify where it should go, just that it should exist.
I think one of the things that's been really interesting, so I go back to that statement about UI design, sort of in some ways feels like it hasn't moved on a lot, but actually what has moved on is this intelligence that goes with it. Last Friday I was talking to NBC Universal, and we actually got into the whole, how can we use analytics to better drive the user experience, to influence the user interface. My joking version of this is this stems from HR processes, is people who use this transaction also use this transaction. So I think anything that allows us to abstract stuff further, make it easier to do, make it easier to amend, make it easier to respond to what else is going on, is helpful. And that for me is what's interesting, is as we move through these things, and I feel like this is something I've seen change a lot in the last couple of years with UI5. A lot of things seem to have got a lot more intelligent, if that's the right word, as each release comes in. We've got better things that have made it easier to do our job well. Yep.
A question for you. I just would like to improve my design skills. Unfortunately, I'm a software architect, so I can only draw UML diagrams. I bought
That's what
book,
I can do.
A book about sketch drawing to write beautiful, beautiful, perhaps in meetings on the whiteboard. And is it the right way? What do you suggest if I want to go? And this is a long road.
Yeah.
But what should be my first steps?
Okay, there's about 3 different things I'm probably going to say in this. The first one is there is actually a really good book I read, and unfortunately I can't remember the title of it, and I also can't find it after I moved house a year ago. It's still in a box somewhere. And basically it just talks about the whole process of drawing and being an artist. So that's really useful, and I've tried to get more in the habit of just drawing every day, but it literally talks about things like spend 5 minutes every day practicing to draw a straight line. You know, and I've actually had this conversation with a good friend of mine who is a graphic designer and artist, and he gets really annoyed when people say to him, "You're so talented," and he says, "Well, yes, I am, but do you know how long I spent practicing to be this good?" You don't see that. You know, the talent is what gets you there in the first place. The practice is what gets you good, if that makes sense. And actually, I think we all have the capability, and I think we've all had that horrible thing happen to us at some point where someone said, "You can't draw," which basically means on day one, you didn't get it right. Now, if we said that to people learning to write code, there'd be no one in this room. I hate this way we treat artistic endeavour as you have talent. There's a lot of hard graft in it. The talent just makes it a bit easier at the beginning, I think.
Maybe as an additional comment to his question, because it fits so well here, there are these SAP Massive Open Online courses which are free, and so there is a new one. I'm not sure whether it's public right now, but it will be soon. It's called Visual Communication, and it's exactly about what you asked. It's like really cool. Drawing straight lines and squares and stuff, and the other thing is faces and that kind of stuff. Exactly for drawing on the whiteboard. So you should check out that one because it's free.
My drawing is not the best in the world, quite frankly. I'm not amazing at it. I'm okay. And actually, I find what's key is being able to communicate the intent of what you've just drawn. So I think the one piece of advice I would give is don't get hung up on it doesn't look like what I want it to. It's does it convey enough information for someone to be able to understand it? And some of my drawings I've done for my team to get an idea started have been ridiculously scrappy. They've literally been, 5 seconds, boom, boom, boom. But it's enough to communicate. I can see Sean nodding, not surprised. He's been on the end of some of those.
UI stencils really help as well.
Yeah. The only thing I would say about the stencils is it drags you back into the control world again. So they are really useful, but I'm not sure they're the day one tool. They're the day two tool, if that makes sense. Anyone else? Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone.